there. Thanks for joining us once again here on Leading Edge. I'm your host, Jeff Smith. I want to start this week by just making sure you realize something. We all live and work in this community, and we take absolutely no joy in reporting bad news, especially when it involves our young people. Tragically, Toledo is not immune to bad news about its young people. Too many lives have been snuffed out by senseless violence in the last few years, and now there are those who will point to mental health. There are those who will point to gun laws. And you know, a lot of times it has more to do with a lack of parenting or simply adults needing to show more maturity, leading by example, and being adults. WTOL 11 just delivered something groundbreaking this past week: the investigation into the murders of two Toledo teens. It was storytelling of a tragic tale unlike anything that you've seen in local news. 5 pieces on the murders of 2 young boys, Wilder and KyShawn Pittman, and the investigation into the 11 people who conspired to lure, kidnap, kill them, and then cover it up. I invited my colleagues Melissa Andrews and Brian Duggar to join me this week to discuss what they thought about this case going into it, the wild speculation, the theories, and how their fascination for true crime led them to dissect this case from a purely journalistic perspective. Mel and Brian, good to have you guys here. Thank you for doing this. I know you've talked about this case a lot in the past week, but I want to kind of start off by going back to what I was talking about and our journalistic job to cover these kind of things and how tough this was going into it, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, it is. When you're talking about 2 young boys, I mean, I have two kids. I mean, they're a little older than these guys were, but it's always difficult whenever you're reporting on children. And you see not just the devastation in, their families, but there are also 11 people that were convicted, and many of their families were also torn apart. I mean, obviously they did bad things, but some of them had very young children.
And that was one of the things, and one of the sides that we don't see as far as the accused, what the other side, I mean, there are branches to all of this that in fact, you've got a diagram that we'll go, I don't want to go into it just yet, but this was part of the design of this storytelling. But I do want to start off with you as well, give you a chance to answer as far as that's concerned, and the toughness going into this type of genre.
Yeah, these were kids, and although they were mixed up within a bad group of people, and maybe they themselves were at least thought to have done some bad things, no one ever deserves this. I have a daughter who's 16 years old, the age of these kids, and you know, that can just be a tough time for kids to kind of figure out, like you said in your monologue, who are the people in their lives and what do they know? They only know what they know.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about piecing this together, piecing the puzzle as it was called. And as you guys look to break this down, and for viewers, they got a little bit each and every night. And if they watch this on WTOL 11 Plus or on YouTube, they got it in one fell swoop, all 5 parts put together. But I was fascinated by the fact of you started off looking at the family impact. So I want to talk to both of you about the response you got going out there, revisiting this, how open they were to talking about it, because the one thing that stuck with me, and you guys really focused on this, the first or second night that this aired, that grandmother who was just overtaken with grief and overtaken with emotion.
Yeah, I mean, I was in the house, and it's a very large family for Wilders. I think he's got 8 or 9 brothers and sisters, and many of them were in the house kind of listening to this. And the really tragic thing about Kamarian is that his mom had died 10 months before he disappeared. She was only like 36 years old, and she had died. And you know, the family was still struggling with dealing with that tragedy. And now they have to, obviously, they'll never be able to heal from this. Yeah. But it was a very emotional scene.
How did you guys split it up? I mean, when you guys, from a behind-the-scenes perspective, you guys talking to one another, here's how we've got to dissect this, here's how we've got to deliver this.
Well, there's two of us, so it's not like many documentaries where you see where there's one reporter on it, so that's one thing. And then we knew that we wanted to include the families, and as you saw in the pieces, they were instrumental in helping police realize who these people were that were involved, and then in finding the boys in that house. Also, the police, there were so many suspects. We wondered, how do you figure out who's who, and everybody's lying, and keep that straight? And then with the prosecution, a lot of these people got deals. We wanted to figure out how that came about. How do you even prosecute a case like this in court? Some of our questions were, what would you do? Could you have been able to solve this case if no one would have talked to you? And then, of course, there are two sides or more to every story, so we thought it was important to talk to either the defendants or their attorneys.
Brian, 20 plus years at the Toledo Blade. Did you ever come across an investigation of this type? Because the one thing, and I want people to realize this as well, this is not only a broadcast journalism presentation, this was a print, this was a digital presentation as well.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. In my career here at WTUL, I've certainly never done anything this comprehensive. And you talk about my time at the Toledo Blade, I was there, 20 years and did a couple investigations, but nothing to this extent. So this really was groundbreaking when you think of, tying the digital component together, the broadcast component. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of people that worked on this. So in my career, which now spans like more than 30 years in journalism, I've never done anything this
But also in local news, you and I have been in the entirety of our careers on the broadcast side of journalism, and within just a few years, we were pretty much told, as most journalists are, keep it to 2 minutes, keep it to 2 minutes. So our management really supported us in being able to fully tell these stories and on the multiple platforms.
When this story first came about, and we're going to go to break here, in our first break here in just a second, but when this first came about, there was so much conversation. I know you and I had conversations, just the parallels that existed. Why were there so many people involved in this case? We started talking about the Pike County case, the Pike County murders, where you get 4 family members who wipe out 8 family members because there was a child custody dispute over that one. Then closer to home, that's down in southern Ohio. Then closer to home, you get 6 people implicated in the Kayla Sadowski murder in Monroe County. So we've had these experiences, although this one set up pretty different, didn't it?
That's why I really was interested in the
Or were there
case.
parallels?
Well, I think that there are questions. How did these 2 kids become involved with these 11 people? These 2 young kids, African-American kids, involved with this whole group of 11 people. What were the relationships? How did they know each other? Who was involved? So I think
Of all different ethnicities, I want to put out there as well.
Yeah, and I think that, we wanted those answers.
Yeah. Did you see any parallels going in as far as what we've seen in the past, stories like that we've covered?
I mean, what I will say about this, I don't think Toledo's ever seen a case like this.
They said they haven't, the police or the prosecutor's office, yeah.
I mean, you mentioned Pike County, and that's the only one that I can even think that's similar to this. But to get those 11 people involved, it was so interesting because just about all of those 11 people believed that they were somehow victims of these kids in some way. And we still, to this day, don't know if these kids ever committed any robberies or break-ins or anything. So
you asked in one of the pieces, in fact, as we go to our first break, Brian asked, why 11 years, or why kids, why teens, why did you go after teens? We're going to talk a little bit more about the police investigation, the fact that there was one specific thing missing when it came to the court case. Stay with us. Leading Edge continues right after this. Welcome back. We appreciate you spending some time once again talking about piecing together the puzzle, the Wilder, KyShawn Pittman murders, the investigation, WTOL 11 releasing just a historic piece, 5 parts putting together not only broadcast, digital, and print just in the last week. I wanted to ask you guys about the suspects in all of this. We've got 11 people, and I remember asking both of you, when you went through the interrogation tapes, and I was curious, I'm like, what did it take for these 11 to roll on each other? and how the prosecutors go about, or how the investigators go about getting that to happen, or does it just happen?
Yeah. When I talked to the defense attorney, he kind of
Because it did
mentioned
happen, correct?
It absolutely happened. And what the defense attorney told me is that, look, as an attorney for guys like this, you know, we kind of get discovery. It kind of trickles out to us. Like in this case, they heard what Corbin Gingrich was telling the police, and then that gets to Cruz Garcia's attorney, and then he shows it and says, hey, Corbin just said this about you. So as they get more and more discovery, the stories tend to change. And that's what we saw in this case, because they brought in these guys 2, 3, 4 different times.
And one of the things that the detective, Sergeant Roy Kennedy, told me is that a good tactic is to get everybody in the room at the same time.
Did they do that?
In different rooms at the same time.
Okay.
Sorry. And you don't know what I'm saying about you, and I don't know what you're saying about me.
But then do they have an officer bouncing back and forth
they'll
between,
go in and
just like you
question
see on TV, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
And so the other thing is, when people start lying, you and I can come up with a broad lie, but it's the minutia, the small details that people can't seem to remember. And then they're also comparing that evidence that they're getting in from the Metro Task Force, from the FBI and the BCI much more quickly than they would had they not involved them. And so they're able to compare that with what's being said.
Yeah, and Jeff, remember this, the police can actually lie to you in a police interview. So sometimes what you see when you have these guys in different rooms, they're like, hey, we're just talking to Corbin over here, and he just said this. And it may not necessarily be true that he really said that.
Yeah.
So there are certainly a lot of different tricks they can use.
Yeah.
They can lie, but I did ask TPD whether they used that tactic, and they said not in this case.
Yeah, they went straight forward. And as you guys are watching those tapes, how many hours did you guys pine over as far as not only the interrogations, but when you guys were putting this whole thing together, I mean, have you added it up as far as hours, minutes spent?
Probably more time
days?
spent going through the trial transcripts. Everything that's been said during the trial was probably the biggest part.
That's what I was just going to say, because I think the trial transcript was about 3,000 pages. And I actually, we were using a program that was helping us to analyze what was being in these transcripts, so I could really focus on the key elements of it, but certainly the transcripts were the most time consuming.
One of the things that came out during the trial itself, and you, in talking to the prosecutors, you said DNA. You used that again and again in talking about how juries kind of hone in on that. Talk about that a little bit, and the fact that there wasn't any.
I'm aging myself, but I can remember doing stories on DNA 15, 20 years ago, reporting and how there was a name for it. It's called the CSI effect, and it's from people watching true crime shows so much, or crime on TV, really. And jurors expect to see DNA, and sometimes they really hold you to that as a prosecutor if they don't see it. So in this case, the prosecution during jury selection says, hey, Jeff, if we're going to choose you, are you able to put aside your desire for DNA and keep an open mind and look at the evidence that we do have?
And the reason there was not any was because, unfortunately, well, Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, they tested the trunk of Charles Walker's Chevy Impala, and this is a big thing the defense brought up to me. You would think there would have been DNA there. Because you put a 16-year-old and a 15-year-old in this trunk, apparently alive at that point, and you would think they would have been struggling, hitting the roof of the trunk, whatever. But I think Melissa had mentioned this earlier in one of the shows, that just because, I may touch something doesn't mean there's going to be DNA, but it doesn't mean that I didn't touch it. Because some people are shedders, and they shed the DNA, and other people just don't. So. And, maybe they swabbed the wrong part of the trunk and there was DNA somewhere else and they missed it when they swabbed. And, BCIs and, the state crime lab, I mean, they're very busy. And I think there's about 5 articles that you can actually send them that they can test.
Yeah.
So, I think Maggie Cuck said this, that she kind of hoped that you could test everything
From
in
the
a
Lucas
case,
County
but you
Prosecutor's
simply
Office,
can't.
yeah.
They did submit more items to the BCI for testing in this murder case than in any other murder case they've submitted.
Let me ask you guys, because over the years, if people have watched enough of these 11 Investigates pieces, sometimes they're used going forward. I wonder if there's anything. You talked about appeal at the very end, in the final piece of this, the defense attorneys looking at the potential for appealing because they believe that their clients were not at the scene or involved, as any good defense attorney is going to say, right? However, is there any part of this, when you look back, is there any part of your investigation that, or is all of it somehow submissible for them?
What I will say is that when I reached out to all of these suspects had different attorneys, and the people that got deals, their attorneys, their clients, they didn't want to talk to me. Now, the people that went to trial and are currently filing an appeal, they wanted to talk to me, and they just filed this appeal. So, yeah, I mean, I think their hope is that maybe our investigation could help that process. And as you mentioned, I mean, the last episode that we aired, I mean, there were things in there that we found that maybe they could use going forward.
Yeah. Was that something that played into it for you? We've got about a minute.
No.
Thinking about how your work would be used going forward?
No.
Not at all.
No, I was just curious to know all of the characters and how they all. Are we ready to show this?
Yeah,
I'm very
please.
proud of it.
Talk about it a little bit.
So this is kind of what I had to make for myself. I'm more of a visual person to figure out who all the people were. And there's more than 11 people on here. So it was a lot more than that. They were all different relationships and who was involved and
Stringing it
who's
together.
cousins to who.
Yeah. And it all came together at the very
Well, you
end.
can see my scribbles. I was wrong sometimes.
Stay tuned. We're going to continue our conversation here on the other side of this break. Leading Edge, back right after this. Welcome back for a final segment here on Leading Edge. Once again, talking to Melissa Andrews and Brian Duggar, 11 Investigates team, who just put together this piece on the loss of these two teens. Why were these two teens ever around, these 11? Was that ever answered?
Well,
Back to your diagram.
Kamarian Wilder was dating another young lady, and her aunt and uncle were the ones that owned that house on Maumee Avenue. And the rest of them were kind of associated through a drug trafficking business, pretty much, drug dealing business.
Yeah, I
The
think
boys were
And
involved in it?
And then they were also friends with the nephews of Brent Kohlhofer.
Yeah, and because Sean actually wasn't supposed to be there. I think they were all surprised whenever he showed up because they're just trying to lure Kamarian to the house because Corbin Gingrich believed that Kamarian had stolen a gun from him.
Yeah.
So they didn't even know that because Sean was going to come along.
What did police, what did the family say to you, even the prosecutor's office? Why did this lead to murder? Right? You can scare kids. You can play dad in the room and talk down to them a little bit. Be adult, not be a murderer.
They used the words, revenge and theft, and they said that, and I'm talking about the
Vengeance,
prosecutors here,
right?
vengeance.
Greed.
And if not for drugs and guns, then this wouldn't have happened. But
And-
to go to that extreme,
Yeah, you also kind of wondered, we know that the kids got, pistol whipped and hit, and you kind of wonder if maybe one of the kids died. Like he got hit too hard and something happened and he passed out, quit breathing, and then they panicked and said, oh man, now we got to get rid of the other one too.
Yeah.
Yeah, the police did say that, it was clear that one of them was strangled. The other one, there was no clear cause of death. And that's the interesting part that I thought too, is you've got to present this case when you don't really know. One of them could have died in the trunk, and then they felt that they had to kill the other.
We don't live in a bubble. We know there's evil in the world, but anybody that you interviewed, or even you guys as journalists, I mean, do you look at this and think, God, this happened in Toledo, this kind of thing?
I think, again, going back to the number of people involved and the adults dealing with these 15 and 16-year-old kids.
That it makes sense?
It doesn't.
What are you saying?
It does not. Yeah, I think that's where I get stuck, is so many adults killing these kids.
Right.
Like you said, your point, to really take it to murder.
Yeah. Brian?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what you had mentioned. I mean, how can you kill 2 kids? I mean, it doesn't make sense, because even if they stole from them, we're talking maybe stealing a gun, maybe stealing a little pot from them. I mean, how does that progress to murder?
Right.
You would think maybe roughing them up, or I don't know, but murder just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Is there finality to all of this? Where does it go from here?
Well, I mean, I think until these appeals play out, there's not going to be. I mean, the family's going to have to deal with these appeals for probably several more years.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just the first step in their appeal. I mean, if they lose this one, Kohlhofer and Walker, I mean, they're going to appeal again and again. And, I mean, they're in prison for life with no chance of parole.
Yeah.
So you might as well appeal, and they've got nothing else to do.
I don't want you to spill the beans. Do you expect to hear from them?
I do. I mean, I do. I think Brent Kohlhofer wants to sit down and talk with me, and I've heard that Charles Walker is considering it. And I mean, maybe people aren't going to be happy about that. Me sitting down with somebody that did something this terrible, but I mean, he's never told his story, and maybe we'll learn something from that interview.
Something to look forward to. Guys, thank you so much. Great work. I hope you're proud of it.
Thanks, Jeff.
A tough story to cover, but obviously we do it for the community. We'll be right back right after this. Once again, you can find Piecing Together the Puzzle, the investigation done by Melissa and Brian at WTOL 11 Plus, our WTOL 11 YouTube page. And of course, you can find out more about Leading Edge. Find our podcast on Apple and Spotify. I'm Jeff Smith. Great to have you with us as always. We'll see you next time right here on Leading Edge.